Welcome to the Winners Win podcast, where we highlight awesome people in Kansas City and their secrets to success. I'm your host, Jaime Simpson. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Net Standard. At Net Standard, we manage technology so you can manage your business. Today, my guest is Tim Barron. Tim is the President and CEO of Kendall Banks. Well, hi, Tim. Thanks for joining me today. We've let the train go by so we can have a real conversation now. That's good.
Yep.
For those who don't know you, why don't we start with you kind of giving, name, title, and sort of how you got to the role you're in now?
Sure. So my name is Tim Barron. I serve currently as the President and CEO of Kendall Bank. Kendall Bank is a $145 million asset community bank based out of Overland Park, Kansas. We serve consumer and commercial clients. My background's always been in banking. I've been in banking for almost 25 years now. And throughout my career, I've been lucky enough to be a part of some high growth, fast paced banks that were getting going. And so I learned on the job of kind of how to build out the infrastructure and the platforms. And it was right about we got done with the second bank is when I had a group of investors / friends that approached me and said, why don't you go do this on your own? And we see you helping grow other banks, go do it on your own. And I've always been a sick entrepreneur at heart, and I think that's how I ended up in banking initially, was just trying to be around entrepreneurs and learn from them. And so the opportunity came to do it on my own, and went to my wife and said, am I crazy? And she said, let's go do it. And so we formed an investor group, and we bought what was Kendall State Bank at the time, a bank that's been around for well over 100 years, out of Valley Falls, Kansas, which is just north of Topeka. Very small rural bank, didn't really have a succession plan in place, so we're able to come in and buy that bank from that family. They've got 3 locations out in Northeast Kansas in the Jefferson County area. We still have those 3 locations out there, and then, like I mentioned earlier, we moved it into Kansas City, into the Overland Park area. I was able to kind of get the band back together and convince people that I'd worked with before at those banks to come join me and let's go do something crazy. And it was just about that time in Kansas City where there was a lot of bank consolidation. So it allowed us to kind of fill a void that was being created because all those small, mid-sized banks were getting bought up by the larger banks. So there was this niche in the market, this void in the market for a small community, high customer service level bank. So we moved into Kansas City, and I've been filling that void ever since. So it's been about just a little over 2 years now.
That's exciting. Exciting. Well, before we really dig into your experience with Kendall and other things, I like to start by asking people, the podcast is called Winners Win, but I like to ask people about a big or a significant or memorable loss that they experienced.
You gotta narrow it down. I think, I was an athlete. We can talk about different losses I've had being, a ball player, but I would say more later in my life, my wife and I, we tried to start a business. We looked at when we bought a business later on. The starting the business didn't work, didn't get off the ground the way we had hoped to. So I would consider that a loss. And then we still, like I said, my wife and I both kind of have that sick entrepreneur nature to us. We bought a small vending business, and it was something that we thought would be really easy and low maintenance, right? And in theory, it looks from 30,000 foot view, it looks really easy. And as we started diving into it, we were like, holy cow, what did we get into? So thankfully, we were able to sell that company off in pieces. But those were 2 significant, I would say, learning experiences. They were losses, but we learned so much from those experiences. And I have so much more empathy now when I look across at my small businesses that we help. When I hear their pains, I can say, I was there on that side of the coin. So try to make the best out of those losses.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the funnier, that's sort of what happens, right? As people start to think about whether it's a little league story or a business story, or you can kind of piece back to it. It's funny how often you're like, well, but this really taught me this other thing that I needed over here. And so I do think it's always kind of nice to look back and think about, and I think it's a universal, right? As everybody, you win some and you lose some. And we're going to spend a lot more time talking about all of your successes, but I think it's always good to kind of remember that not everything's a success. And particularly when you're an entrepreneur, you're going to swing and miss a few times before you hit,
That's right.
Yeah.
You learn way more from the failures more than the successes. So. sure.
Yeah. So you mentioned small business, and I know you sort of grew businesses largely with sort of SBA
Mhm.
small business. So
Yeah.
what attracted you to that initially? Was it your experience as an entrepreneur, or
No, it was interesting. It was it really just kind of fell in my lap, thank God. And so it was right around the recession time frame. It was 08, 09, and it was a lot of uncertainty in the market, especially in the banking market. And we were going through a bank exam with regulators, which can be arduous. And then doing it during the recession is even tougher. And a regulator was going through my loans that they had identified, and there was one they didn't ask any questions about. And I said, "Well, what about that loan over there?" And they said, "Oh, that's got the SBA guarantee on it. We're not worried about that." So it was kind of like a light bulb hit. And I'm like, I need to learn about this because a lot of my friends were losing their jobs in the banking industry. And I'm like, if regulators like this, I need to jump into this thing. And
Yep.
it's we'll go into the details of SBA lending, but it's a loan product that the government backs with a guarantee that helps promote the banks to lend out into the small business communities and provide loans when you otherwise wouldn't, or may provide additional risk. So I started to learn how to do it. It was a more complicated type of lending product, but when I started getting in and learning how to do it, I realized it really separated me from my competition. And Kansas City is a very heavily banked town, and
Yeah.
we're a commodity-driven company and an industry, so we're not offering anything much different than our competitors down the street. We're loaning money and we're taking money and we're helping you move money. So it's not like we're all that intuitive or unique, but the SBA loan product did allow me to kind of go off into this area over here where now I went from 30 competitors to maybe 5 competitors. And then I further learned how to do more complicated, larger SBA loans, and then really got good at learning how to help people buy businesses using this SBA loan product. And that was where my last 2 banks that were just getting up and going, and moved over to them and built teams up to provide this solution for the banks, and really found like, man, this is a really unique way to build great clientele and do it in a safe way that protects the banks but also provides the tools and solutions that these businesses need. And so that's what we carried, and that's when I talked about moving my team over. It was a lot of those SBA really savvy folks that moved over with me at this bank at Kendall, and then we became one of the top SBA lenders here in town during the post-COVID area when not a lot of banks were lending. So
Yeah, you've gotten a lot of recognition for that, and all of the programs that you've grown. And I
yeah,
know I can't remember the statistics. I'm sure you know it, but you've had some exponential growth over the last couple of years in a
yeah.
time that, like you said, a lot of people weren't doing that lending.
Yeah, we did. And it was one of these situations where I've learned through doing the SBA for so many years that the SBA is a great product in good times and in bad times. But in the bad times is really an opportunity for us when a lot of banks pull out of the market for us to lean into the market. And that's what we did. And in the post-COVID era, nobody knew what was going to happen. The world had stopped spinning. So we had bought the bank in December of 19, January 20. And then, 3 to 4 months later, everything stopped. Nobody knew what was going to happen. And we were, wearing masks or being sequestered to our homes. So it was that time frame is when the SBA came out with everybody knows about the PPP loans and the idle loans, but what a lot of people don't know is as well as they also created a lot of stimulus as they modified a lot of the existing SBA loan programs to allow them to be even more appealing for the businesses and the banks. They increased the guarantee percentage. They eliminated the fees. So the ability to do the SBA loans got a lot easier and protected the bank even more. Well, us just buying this $34 million asset bank and coming into Kansas City, we kind of looked at each other and said, well, we know how to do this in the bad times. So we started really going out there and pushing the SBA loan product, and it worked out really well. Like you said, it allowed us to grow, and now we're $145 million bank. And a lot of that was during the stimulus era and the COVID era when not a lot of banks were out there lending. So,
Yeah, you mentioned, and I think for people who aren't in banking, and having been somebody who was in it for a couple minutes and then I came out of it, but I was in it just long enough to have some appreciation for what you're doing. But it's a very different industry, I think, from a lot of other commercial sort of business. You grow differently, you measure differently. I think one of the things that maybe would be interesting to me would be, how do you characterize, like you talked about, there's really only 4 or 5 banks in your size and scale doing a lot of lending to small businesses. How does that, I mean, how do you piece together the banking market in Kansas City? Because there's such a huge variety of
there is.
players. And I think we could probably play like Family Feud and sit here and name like 20 of them, even with people who aren't in banking. So how do you differentiate? How do you figure out where you fit?
Yeah, so the Kansas City is an interesting place from the landscape of the banking world. It's a very stable market compared to like the coast. So everybody really likes the Kansas City market to come in. So we get a lot of large banks that come in from out of town
Sure.
specifically to come in, and they play the rate game, and they go into trying to get as much market share as they can. And then you've got the mid-tier banks, UMB, Commerce, CrossFirst Country Club, and those guys will come in and they can compete with the larger ones, but still try to provide the services for the smaller ones. So that's when I mentioned earlier, we were really trying to fill that void and that gap in that landscape and marketplace is when there was all this acquisitions and all these buyups from these larger banks, we kind of saw that, well, and we were hearing from a lot of these clients that I don't even know who my banker is anymore. I don't know who this is. They change banks. I don't even know who it is anymore. I don't think he's with the bank. And then employees fall out. So there was just a lot of uncertainty and nervousness for a lot of these. And then we came into the market saying, well, here's my cell phone and here's this guy's cell phone. And you don't have to call a 1-800 number anymore. And so we knew that that was going to be it always has been a nice void to fill, and it will continue, I think, to always be a little bit of a void in Kansas City because the Kansas City market is so stable. So when we look at the future where we want to take Kendall, it's like, do we want to be a multi-billion-dollar bank? No, not really, because then we just fall into that same trap that we feel like a lot of other people do. Don't get me wrong, from the banking world, there's tons of efficiencies being that large. But I think you lose a lot of what the fun part of banking is, and that's really just looking the borrower in the eye and the business in the eye, being able to help them and be their partner and be their guide. And I think that if we can stay at just a couple hundred million, 2, 3, 400 million, then I think we really serve that niche in that market in Kansas City, which will always be needed.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to explain it, and I do appreciate the use of her phrase fun in banking, which I think probably not everybody would use, but you have to enjoy what you do, right? To really invest your time in it and spend as much time as I'm sure you are doing. But what have been some of the challenges for you as you've gone through this process of sort of building your own brand and your
Yeah.
own bank and going into the market? Have there been any unexpected bumps?
Oh, for sure. 100%. Yeah. So I've always been able to be a part of banks that were either just bought or building and growing. To take this thing from the first acquisition, and it was like I said, a $34 million bank, and it's a very small town. The needs and the demands that the customers have out there are not the same needs and demands that are expected in Kansas City. So that first year was, I felt like we were just trying to figure out what's the squeakiest wheel, what's the highest, what's the biggest fire that we have to put out. And a lot of that is, just building out the infrastructure. I feel like I've said the word infrastructure more in the last 2 years than I have in my entire life because I've done nothing but, trying to get the right people in place, the right procedures, the right policies, the right programs. The bank that we bought didn't even have an online banking capability. And in Kansas City, that's you have to have that. That is beyond reproach. And then you have to have remote deposit, you have to have mobile deposit, you have to have ACH capabilities, you have to have extensive wire capabilities.
Sure.
So coming in there and we're looking around and we're trying to look, we're looking through the catalog of products that they have there and we're like, holy cow, there's not much that we can really build off of here. And so we had to really kind of create a lot of the products. And so that was probably a lot of the challenges is day to day. It was almost like, yeah, this person's asking for a copy of this policy. And then we're looking through and we're like, I don't think they ever wrote that policy. So it's like, okay, well, let's write that policy. And then I felt like we did that about 30 times. And then it's, yeah, what's our ACH capability here? And we're like, we don't even have that capability yet. So then it was like, wow, so we got to build all this up. So thankfully, we were able to bring a lot of really well-versed, experienced operational people in that were in. And we were able to just kind of let them loose. And there was nothing more comforting for me as the leader to look at them and say, I don't know what we're going to do here. And they say, we got it. We know, we got it. We'll call these people. We'll do this. We'll do that. And it's like, okay, good. So I spent the last 2.5 years just kind of constantly doing this. And so now we're at a fun position where it's like, okay, there's still challenges, don't get me wrong, but the challenges are a little bit farther and fewer between and are a little easier to solve than I don't know what we're going to do.
So we were talking about banks being different sizes and scales, and you mentioned that Kendall really operates as a small business in the scheme of banking. So how does that affect how you relate to your customers?
Sure. So yeah, this is a good point because I have to remind my small businesses a lot of the time, like, hey, we're a small business trying to help a small business. And so a lot of people think that, well, you're a bank. Banks are huge. Banks are humongous. Everybody thinks Bank of America. I'm like, no, we are no different than you in a lot of ways. And we are in an industry that sometimes is a far-reaching regulatory guideline that may cause a very large bank to say, oh yeah, no problem. We'll just send it down to the third floor and we'll get that mapped out. Versus a small bank where there's, 3 or 4 of us or a one-person compliance team, we're looking at it and like, how are we going to make this adjustment based on what, Washington D.C. just changed with the FDIC? And we're like, oh my gosh, that's going to cost us, $50,000 to make this change, and that's real money, and it's an important factor for a lot of people that they don't understand that it's not as easy for us to be as nimble as the larger banks, where we might provide better service and better, there's some a little bit of drawbacks every now and then, but from the other side of the coin, it allows us to be very empathetic with our small businesses, and they're very understanding of us. I mean, when a lot of our small businesses were that we had relationships where we're looking to move their businesses over, we were like, yeah, we can do that. We can't do this, and this yet, but I think they understood and they appreciated it. And they're like, okay, yeah, man, we're with you. We know you're building something cool, and we're going to hang in there with you, and we trust you guys, and you're partners with us. So it's been a relief to see that kind of camaraderie from one small business to another.
Well, I think if you want to be, if the niche is being a smaller, hands-on, white glove kind of experience for the focuses on the small business customer. I mean, I think there's such a huge difference in being able to have that personal interaction. That's really what you're selling, right? That what you're selling and what we're buying is the fact that you can have that experience. I was thinking about when we first met really was during the PPP loan time.
Yeah.
And there was such a huge advantage to being able to just text you and say, okay, here's where we're at,
That's
what's
right.
going on, what are we doing? And we were ready to go very, very quickly with all of that, where
Yeah.
I had peers that I was networking with that hadn't heard back from big
Lost.
banks or had nobody to ask questions as the models were changing. And I think that's a big value to small businesses and bigger businesses too. I mean, I think there's a real advantage in being able to know who's on the other side of the table so that you've got somebody that is really a partner versus somebody who's just providing you a product.
Well, especially in the commercial world. I mean, the consumer world, your banking needs are pretty much taken care of at your phone anymore. But from a business, and that's a great example. You know, when people go to the larger banks and they're like, oh, but their rate is here, and I'm like, that's great, and they'll be a great partner as long as you don't ever need anything.
Yeah,
But
that's right.
but businesses are fluid and things are always ever changing and things happen unexpectedly all the time. If it doesn't, your business is stagnant, not growing. So a lot of our businesses really appreciate exactly what you just said. It's like, okay, I knew exactly where we were at this time. The communication was good. I knew we weren't getting lost in the shuffle. And that is a value add so many times that we sometimes our clients don't realize it until they go and they move and they're like, oh, but this rate is going to save us X amount of dollars. I'm like, we absolutely get it. We can't compete with a lot of their rates. But then, a year later, they're coming hand in hand. They're like, oh my gosh, it was a nightmare, and I would much rather pay a higher rate and then know that you've got my back. And that if for some reason, an unexpected overdraft occurs in my account, that I know you're calling me real quickly saying, hey, is everything okay? I'm here to help you. We can increase your line of credit. You doing okay? And that's a real scenario that happens all the time to a lot of our clients. Right, wrong, or indifferent. It just happens. Mistakes happen. Unexpected bumps in the road happen. And that's the essence of a small business. And a lot of the times that's that having that partnership in a bank is what makes all the difference to get you through those sleepless nights.
Yeah, and I think there's value in that, right? And I think your perfect partner or your perfect client is somebody who understands the value of that. And we have that same, I mean, we get into that discussion a lot from an IT perspective too, is you can find somebody who'll do what we do cheaper. I mean, absolutely you can, but they may not be the partner you want. They may not be the somebody who's calling out and saying, "Hey, we saw this thing come out, and now we stayed up all night patching it, so you're good to go. So if you see it on the news, you're fine." And there's just a different level of value, but that means that not everybody's the perfect client, and that some people are going to go try bigger bank and then come back and go, "Okay, never mind, that didn't work out as well as we thought," and that's okay. I mean, I think you've got to have some real confidence in who you are in the market and
Yeah.
what your right
Well,
client is.
Yeah, and you want me to toot your horn, but you guys were very much a central part of the piece I was able to find on the IT side as we were building the bank, because there was a lot of the IT side to me is a whole different set of risks, a whole different set of requirements where I'm trying to fake it until I make it. But there's a lot of times I'm calling you up and I'm like, hey, I think we need this and I think we need this. I'm not quite sure the path. And we'd have whiteboarding sessions and up here, 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 and we would figure it all out pretty quickly. So yeah, it's a great example of how we would not have had the success we've had as smooth as we've had if it wasn't for the right type of partner like you that's able to be fluid and flexible and easy and calm, kind of a calming nature to say, no, you're fine, we got you. We'll do this and we'll do that and we'll sub in here and we'll help you there and we'll do this audit over here and you'll be okay. And it's like, okay, good.
Well, I think as a small business, every small business needs partners, right? Your
Mhm.
small business and my small business, a big part of what happens and the big part of the way you meet those regulatory requirements is you have to figure out pretty fast. I can't do all of this with what I've got. Like
That's
I've
right.
got to find somebody else. I've got to buy. I always I talk about cycles all the time in my life, but it's like I've got to buy cycles from somebody else. I've got to find somebody who can take this piece on because I've got this other stuff over here. And so I think having good partners is vital. Like I don't know how you
100%
do
agree.
it without having some trusted people in your corner that you can call and say, I don't know the answer to
That's
this.
100%.
Like,
You know, the number of times I did that, oh my gosh, I got over the fear of feeling
that's
stupid
right.
calling somebody because I'm like, nope, I'm not even going to act like I know what I'm talking about here. I'm going to call them and they're going to help me and guide me. And yeah, the vendors and having the right people around you is key and crucial. So for sure.
So tell me to change topics a little bit. Tell me what's coming up for the bank. What are the things that you're
Yeah.
planning for this year or for next year that you're excited about?
Yeah, so we've spent the last 2.5 years, like I've said earlier, just building and growing and putting infrastructure in place. And now we're at a kind of a fun spot where we've got all the products and solutions that are expected in Kansas City. And now it's kind of the fun, like, okay, what can we do now to compete? Because our competitive landscape is not just what you can see down the street. It's a lot of the times who's online and competing for your business. And it's the neobanks out there and the digital banks out there and the Squares and the PayPals and the Zells, and those are our next competitors that we have to figure out how to compete with. And so now we're going out there looking, trying to figure, all right, what type of solution can we offer that may be a little bit more unique, but allows us to compete more with those people online. So that's what we're looking at now. So, complete automated digital account solutions, as well as maybe financial budgeting, financial wellness tools that can be integrated within the app that helps provide people not just how much money they have in their bank account, but how much did you spend in certain areas right away that allows us to provide kind of a value added again to help us again compete with those people online. So we're in a revolutionary period of banking right now to
Oh, I
where
totally agree.
it is incredible how quick we have to be aware of how the landscape is changing. And the old way of banking and doing things 100 years ago is gone. It's not going to be there anymore. COVID was nothing more than an accelerant to what was already happening in the industry. Fintech platforms are being bolted onto banks like daily, and it is quick and it is fast and it is expensive. And if you're not on top of it, you will be left in the dust trying to figure out, I don't know where I'm going to get my next deposit, because everybody else is looking at you like, well, no, you can't do this. And they're just clicking something on their phone like, I just paid an invoice. I just invoiced a guy here and I'm doing it all through this app. And that's not a banking app. So we have to be aware and cognizant of, all right, we have to get in front of payment systems, and we got to figure out online how we become the premier provider for payment solutions for our clients. And so when we look forward, it's not how do we become biggest baddest bank in Kansas City. It's like, how can we continue to be nimble? How can we continue to provide great customer service, but then also provide the solutions that our small businesses and our consumers need and expect to compete with those guys with endless amounts of IT budget and digital strategy budgets. So we got some exciting stuff going, but that's kind of what's on the horizon for Kindle.
You're right. I mean, I think it's a really fun time to be in banking as long as you've got an appetite for change,
Yeah.
right? And I think as being entrepreneurial in spirit, that probably, that personality trait bodes well for you as you
Yeah.
approach that for Kindle. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, you got to be a little sick in the head. And that's us, and that's my whole group. And thankfully, we have a wonderful executive management team and a board that is completely aware that we've got to continue to think outside the box to really make a difference. And so it's reassuring for me as a leader to know that I've got a lot of support around me that knows and is aware that we've got to be nimble.
Well, and everything that you've learned over, your experience with Kendall and before, what advice would you give? Like, we have kids that are about the same ages, but you had to look at your kids and sit them down and say, okay, if you learn one thing from me right now, here's what you need to know. What would
Yeah,
you say?
I would say you have to approach every situation with humility and a humble heart. And me going in, and it would be very easy for me to act brazen and stick my chest out, like we're going to do this and we're going to do that. But if I didn't surround myself with people who were smarter than me, we would never be where we are. And I think part of that is just being humble and knowing you don't know everything, and it's okay to not know everything. It took me probably the first year of doing this adventure to say, okay, it's okay, I don't know everything. I'm going to put the right people around me, whether it's internally in my executive team or the vendors that you mentioned, and then approaching everything internally with a servant leadership heart too, and knowing that, okay, if my teller does not have the tools that they need to succeed, or my frontline doesn't have what they need to succeed, none of this matters. And trying to make money the primary driver is never going to work. You have to make sure that your employees have everything they need to be successful and happy, and then the money comes along. So I would say it's a long answer to say humility, and just be humble and be a servant. And I think that has bode well for me to bring the right people around me that truly enjoy working for Kendall Bank.
That's great. I think that's a great way to put it. And I appreciate you taking time out of your day to be here
Yeah,
with
this was
me and
fun. I
talk about it.
appreciate you inviting me. This was
Thanks.
great.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.